Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tiger Tank 12, however you call me, I don't really care, and welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are going to be reviewing the FCM 50t today. This is a tank that I have bought a lot of years ago, a very long time ago, and it's certainly one of those tanks I play whenever I feel like I deserve a punishment for maybe using too much gold in a certain other vehicle. I don't even know. But either way, the FCM 50t is still in the game and it's still an incredible tank in both kinds of way, in being extremely good in certain scenarios, but also being phenomenally bad in a lot of other scenarios. So let's jump right into the review. The FCM 50t is first and foremost a French tier 8 heavy premium tank. One of the first, it's actually the first tier 8 premium heavy tank that they added to the French tree. And it was actually a very well liked tank back in the days. When this tank came out, I saw so many players running around with the FCM 50t because that's when there were not a lot of heavy tanks with massive amounts of armor, or a lot of heavy tanks with armor but no speed, and this tank had the mobility of a medium tank that just other heavy tanks didn't have. Also, it has a very interesting gun, but we'll get to that in just a second. So let's talk about the status that the FCM 50t has. It's probably a fan favorite and also like one of the most despised premium tanks for players that don't like the playstyle of the FCM 50t. I can see a lot of players really hating French heavy tanks because they are not really as heavy as or as armored as heavy tanks should be, and they're really special to play. And it's the same with the FCM 50t. It doesn't have an auto-loading system that the AMX 50-100 has, or the 50B, or the 50-120. The FCM 50t is a standard one-shot single loading or single-shot loading heavy tank, and it has preferential matchmaking. That is not to be forgotten. Preferential matchmaking, you can only see tier 9 vehicles, so that's already a big plus if you think about it. But let's jump into the firepower characteristics, and let's take a look at the gun that we have. We have a 90mm gun, which is a really interesting gun on this vehicle, because back in the days, I think a majority of the tier 8 heavy tanks were tier 8 was the first tier where tanks and heavy tanks gotten like a 105mm caliber gun, or maybe even 122, see the IS-3. That's what made the tier 8 so special, because tier 7 at that time, I think most of the tanks had either 90mm guns or maybe even a 105mm gun if it was the T-29, but most did not have a caliber exceeding over 90mm, and that was rather special, unless you were playing the Soviets with the IS tanks and the KV-3. But either way, you're getting a very fast firing 90mm DCA 45 gun, which gives you the alpha damage that is, or the average damage, which is pretty standard on tier 8 medium tanks with 90mm guns of 240, and very good pen back in the days. 212mm was really good for standard AP shells. Back then, most of the tanks had below 200mm of pen with the 90 or maybe the 100mm gun. I still remember the T-32 having, I think, about 198mm of pen, and it just didn't always cut the chase, and the 212mm of penetration that you had was enough to, go up against certain vehicles and, snipe from further distances, because the FCM 50t has a very specific playstyle. So, as you can see, it also has APCR shells and high explosive shells. The interesting part about this vehicle is that since it's so large and it's a rather long vehicle, it has a lot of shell capacity, so it carries 91 shells. You don't have to be scared of running out of ammunition with this tank, because you have 91 shells, and I would be really surprised if you would ever need 91 shells in a game. I don't even know if you can spend every single shell in a game. You'd have to be constantly firing with this tank because, yeah, 15 minutes, maybe if the game lasts 15 minutes, you'll be able to spend all the shells, but you would have to be firing constantly. So yeah, the rate of fire, as you can see, is pretty damn good, 8.82 rounds per minute. That's pretty good. That's one of the things that really made the FCM 50t, that rate of fire is really deadly, especially if you have like a good crew, since this tank has actually 5 crew members instead of 4. So you had to have a separate kind of loader that you had to train. Unfortunately, I never really had the need for a loader on my French heavy tanks, I think, because until they actually released the other French heavy tank line, the Amex 50B and the 5120 only always relied on 4 crew members. So yeah, that guy right there is a bit in the wrong space, and I have to still skill him to get brothers in arms and you know, to put that in. This guy has been around a long time. It shows you how little I've played this FCM 50t. But either way, moving on, you can see the DPM 2118 doesn't seem to be the craziest DPM, but still with that rate of fire, well, I think that DPM is going to be working in your favor. One of the things that always let this tank down for me was the dispersion. It had really great rate of fire, but it always had a drawback. Back then, tanks always had drawbacks when they had really good stats. In one certain area, they had some specific drawbacks that could hamper the performance of the vehicle a little bit. And you had to work with that, or it was just a feature to balance out the vehicle. So the dispersion at 100 meters is pretty bad. 0.36 dispersion at 100 meters. So your accuracy on this tank is really lacking. You'll notice that when you're sniping tanks, when your shells go left, right, and center all over the place. There are certain times where you're really confused with what that shell spread actually is when you're playing the FCM 50t. But still, you can work with that, especially now with the new equipment. You can actually get an equipment piece, which is somewhere in here if I can find it. Let me just see. Oh, it's right there. Improved aiming, which gives you an additional -5% on dispersion, which will allow you to have better accuracy. And also you can train that with brothers in arms, and not just that, with the new and highly controversial field mechanics, you can also up the accuracy, probably in the second or the third thing right here, right there, with parallax adjustment. So you can actually make this tank quite interesting. I'll have to make an update video later down the road when I get this modification, because right now I do not have it. But I can imagine the FCM 50t being just a little bit better with that additional modification installed. So moving on, the aim time on the other hand is pretty good, 2.3 seconds. You can get that down a little bit and you can make this tank work. As you can also see is that this tank has 10 degrees of gun depression, 17 degrees of gun elevation, which is very rare for French tanks, or used to be very rare for French tanks. I still remember for the French heavy tanks or the medium tanks, when, you know, it was a really awkward engagement and the Batchat just couldn't lift its gun because the turret was mounted on such a low point that it wasn't able to swivel up and you had a lot of awkward scenarios where you just couldn't fire back when you were in a French tank sitting down below. And I think nowadays it isn't as bad as it used to be. So at least there has been a bit of love shown to the French. Now moving on to the survivability, and that's where this tank is really laughable. This is why a lot of people really dislike the FCM 50t, because the armor layout on this vehicle is just a real joke. So you have 1,500 hit points. That's, I think, about the average that you have. So you don't get additional hit points for the lack of armor that you are having on this tank. You have 120 millimeters on the front of this tank. Same for the turret and the hull. 80 on the side and 60 on the rear of the turret and 80 on the rear of the hull, which is quite interesting if you think about it, that this tank has 80 millimeters on the rear. That's thicker than some American tanks, but still, this tank lacks armor very, very severely all over the place. So what ends up happening is people see this tank, they lock onto you, and they ruin your day because it's a big target, it's a huge target, it's easy to shoot at, it's easy to go through, it doesn't matter where you shoot, usually you end up penetrating this tank. The upper plate right here, which looks like it is at an angle, you'd imagine that maybe it gives you an additional 30 to 40 millimeters of armor. The fact is, I think the thickest part at the front is 144 millimeters thick, and the turret, probably the gun mantlet, is a bit thicker, but still, it's a big target and it doesn't hold up very well. The fact is right now also, oh no, actually no, I have modified configuration class 1 to give this tank more durability and better repair speed because I had it lying around. Not because I wanted to put it on this vehicle, but because I had it lying around. And I would never really play this as a heavy tank. I would never play the FCM 50t as a standard heavy tank that you would play like a 50 TP prototype, a Bisonte C45 or something like that, because they all have armor. This tank lacks armor in the most important category. What it does make up for, though, is the fact that it has an incredible engine. 1,250 horsepower strong engine is what accelerates this tank. You have incredible speeds, 51 km per hour top speed, 20 km per hour top speed reverse. That's not too good, but still the 51 km per hour is really great. And since you have that engine power, you have the acceleration to reach it as quickly as you can. So this tank feels a lot faster than it actually is. The 51 km per hour, I imagine it to be faster actually. This is the very first time I checked the stats on this vehicle, but actually I thought it was faster. But still, the 51 kilometers is going to get you from point A to point B really, really fast. You also have great traverse speed for this vehicle, 45.67 degrees per second. So this is on a level of a medium tank, not on the level of a heavy tank, and that's what you really need. That's one of the things that a lot of people hated when playing the FCM, because this is not supposed to be like a frontline heavy tank that is supposed to be holding some kind of line. It's supposed to be a flanking, going with the medium tanks and, you know, assisting with the amazing firepower that you have at your disposal, and not being the one getting shot at, or maybe, you know, the hit points being shared in a pool of several different vehicles instead of just being one. Because if you get singled out, your lifetime in the battlefield is going to be really, really limited and very short. What I also forgot about to show you guys is the 37.55 degrees per second turn time on the turret, which is also decent. Combine that with the rotation of the tracks, you're going to be quite mobile and nimble, and you're going to be able to turn around very, very quickly. Since it's a heavy tank, it doesn't have any real concealment, and it's a very big one at that, so if you get spotted, well, good luck to you. What it does have a little bit though is the view range is actually not too bad. I'm really interested in the stock view range of the turret, which is 400 meters. That's not too bad if you think about it. But to sum it up real quick, this is a heavy tank that really suffers on its own, but can be really powerful with some support, because it has incredible DPM, or it used to have really good DPM. It still has very good DPM to this day. It has great pen. You really don't need to dip into the APCR column at all because you're a preferential matchmaking vehicle. And the mobility of this tank is amazing. You have great view range, you have really good mobility, and the only thing you're lacking is the survivability. You don't have the armor. The armor will hold up at tier 6, yes, maybe even at tier 7, but at tier 8, I can guarantee you that you have to get incredibly lucky to bounce things from incoming rounds, or from any opponents with a specific caliber. That's one of the reasons they picked this vehicle out of the store, or they pulled it out of the store, because it was just, I think it wasn't too friendly for the new World of Tanks players, and you can see what Wargaming thinks of us players, since they're power creeping tier 8 and have been power creeping tier 8 for a couple of years now, since we have the Defender, the Object 703, the IS-3A, you know, the SC-130 PM. We've had all these vehicles, the Burasque. The FCM 50t is like an ancient, antique vehicle that still is around, but we don't really know why it's still in the game, but it's still cool to have this vehicle. And if I see players playing the FCM 50t, I'm always super excited, because like, who plays the FCM 50t? You're putting your team at a major disadvantage most of the time, but still, I mean, if you get into the right position, if you get into the right kind of scenario, you can do really, really well that other tanks just couldn't do. I mean, the firepower, the rate of fire is also available on tanks such as the Carnarvon Action 10, right? That thing has even bigger or better DPM than the FCM 50t. But what the Carnarvon doesn't have is, or Carnarvon, I'm sorry about that, it doesn't have that mobility. It's really unique. This is a very unique tank that has that mobility that the other vehicles don't have. That's why, like, if you like to play medium and light tanks, the FCM 50t was a super interesting vehicle to transition into when you wanted to go into heavy tanks and you wanted to have a bit more mobility, a bit more pace. Now there are obviously some premium tanks, some premium heavy tanks as well, that have gotten a bit of a speed buff. For example, the Czechoslovakian Tier 8 premium heavy tank that they just released, which isn't too slow either, but you know, it just shows you that the FCM 50t is the perfect example to show off the power creep that we have in this game. So yeah, you know what, that's enough talking. Let's jump into the game and let's figure out what the FCM 50t is all about. We're gonna see all the good things and the bad things, probably more of the bad things than the good things. But hey, you never know. Maybe we get into that one of those amazing games, right? So, I've had a bit of a difficult time getting the right kind of gameplay to show off all the, you know, the characteristics, to show off everything. But I think this game nails it pretty much on the head, because this is a setup that you will see quite often when you're playing the FCM 50t, and that is a tier 8 only match. And that doesn't seem to be that bad. I mean, it's the same tier. I mean, nothing can go wrong, right? It's a bit more complicated than that. Let's put it like that. The FCM 50t is a very old premium tank, so it was introduced into the game when, at a time when things were very different in this game, and the meta was completely different. So they haven't really touched the FCM 50t since they haven't sold it anymore in the last, I think, 3 years. But a lot of things have changed, and you will notice that. One of the cool things about the 50t is still that it has a very, very good mobility. Its mobility is really great, and you can see that we've been very aggressive, and we've just pushed into the middle. That's something that not a lot of heavy tanks can do. But we are very careful here, because we know that at the base, at the enemy base, their tank destroyer is waiting for us, and this ELC even 90, although it's just a light tank, can still hurt us very, very much so with his 3 rounds that he can put into us. You have 1,500 hit points, which doesn't sound too bad, but it's not a lot. Trust me, when you're playing this game, you need every single hit point. So we kind of baited this M41, and I'm still scared to push into it because I'm, you know, worried about the tank destroyers in the back. But disaster strikes, and we miss the light tank right there, and our M41 Walker Bulldog gets knocked out by the tank destroyer. That's why I did not want to be too far out here in the middle. But now, since we're in the middle, we have the opportunity to be a bit more, you know, offensive and utilize the very, very good rate of fire that we have on this tank and help our team on the other side over there. The question, though, is, or the problem is that we have already talked about prior before we went into the gameplay, and that is the accuracy of this tank. This tank is not very good in close quarter engagement, but in mid to long ranges, you can do fairly well because the reload time is really, really good. I might not have aimed as well right there, but you can see that a lot of my shots just kind of went all over the place. Only 2 shots went in out of the 5 that I fired right there. And I got spotted again, and I'm in a very awkward position. I want to help my team, but I can only do that if I do go forward again, and if they are still at the same point where you can actually shoot them and not behind the rock. Unfortunately, the enemy team has pushed right into our heavy tanks, and they're starting to decimate them right over there. But we still have the opportunity to shoot these tanks over there, but once again, the accuracy lets me down. This time, we hit, but it's not going to be enough. We are not going to be able to help our team enough in this position to actually win the game. We've already lost too many tanks, so we are very much down, and we only have, you know, about 7 tanks remaining, while the enemy team has 13 tanks still in the game. And that's just one of the things that will happen a lot. There will be a lot of times where you don't really have an impact on the game, because the FCM 50t just does not have the armor to deal with any of that. You can't really be a flanking tank because you're a very large target, and you have to be very careful when you flank. On maps such as this, where it's basically you know, a face-on-face engagement, you are basically in a very awkward scenario, especially if there's artillery. But once again, our shot goes somewhere into the ground. We do bounce a shot, or we get lucky right there, but that's where you can see the strengths of the FCM 50t. We are able to just hammer into this T-32, and we're just able to farm him basically for what his HP is worth. But since the game is already done, it doesn't help us at all. Like, we still have the 212mm of penetration, we still have the mobility, we don't have the survivability though, and we still have that sometimes reliable, sometimes very unreliable gun that is kind of, I don't even know what you should call it. It's like it's a wonder box that sometimes works and sometimes it just doesn't. But still, you can see with that rate of fire that you have, we're already 2,469 damage. If you're going up against maybe a T-32 like that, well, you're going to be able to do some damage, right? Because you know how to shoot a T-32, and a T-32 is, well, it's a standard tank that was in the game about 10 years ago, when this tank was introduced as well. But now, if you have to face maybe a tank such as the Object 703, where every second shot bounces, where he can just annihilate you with 2 well-placed shots, or when you have to fight against that premium tank from Czechoslovakia, you're looking down the barrel of vehicles that you can't really face. The thing is, the mobility on this tank is truly amazing. It's really cool to drive around with this tank and be fast and flank with medium tanks, but that always depends on the maps as well. This is a map where this tank doesn't work very well. That's why I went into the middle, to utilize my speed and to contest the middle and help out on the side when they were pushing, and also here. But since our sides didn't hold out very long, we weren't able to hold or to help out very, very well. And since you're a support tank, well, if you cannot really support and your team is struggling, you can't really take any of that, you know, responsibility onto your shoulders and carry, because you don't really have the resources, the tools at hand to do that. I can show you one more little clip out of a game where you can just see what awkward scenarios you are in when you're playing the FCM 50t. Even when you're top tier and the game is basically completely in your favor, but you still have to be extremely careful because you need to preserve your HP. And I think we're going to jump into that gameplay real fast, because this one wasn't too long, and I hope I can paint a picture for you what the FCM 50t experience is like in the year 2021. So the second game that we're going to look at, but just I think the very first 5 or 6 minutes of the game, is of the FCM being top tier in a perfect matchup. T-34 as opponent, a Lansen as SU-130PM, and the rest is basically just tier 7 and tier 6. And we're top tier. No artillery, so we can really make this work, and we also have 10 degrees of gun depression. So you can't really say that this is not an ideal game for the FCM 50t. This would be an ideal game for any tier 8 tank. Doesn't matter, premium, non-premium, heavy tank, medium tank. This is where you want to end up when you're playing tier 8, because you're going up against tier 6 and you should have the advantage. So let's see how well the FCM 50t fares. Right there we have the AT7, and obviously it's difficult to snipe, but this tank just has a very limited accuracy of 0.36, and you really feel that, especially at a distance that is greater than 200 meters. But still, you can see that rate of fire that we have, that's great. Once again, the accuracy lets us down. Maybe I should let the circle let it fully close, but you know, sometimes you have to snapshot and you want to have the most damage potential, so that's why I do it. But the 10 degrees of gun depression, that's beautiful on this thing. We put one into the IS, you know, we put one into the SU 130 PM. No, actually, we just put 2 in the IS. And now we're in a very awkward position because we don't want to push, and I don't want to get hit by that KV2. If that KV2 would have hit me, that would have probably done a lot of damage. But keep in mind, this thing has 80 millimeters of side armor, so I'm not really sure how much pen the 150 2mm howitzer shell has of the KV2, but I don't think it is about 80 millimeters of armor. That's right here, that's one of the things you want to have happen in a FCM 50t. You have a nice little shot, it's only 300 meters away, they can't see you, and you can snipe him and you can just take damage every couple of minutes and, you know, do a little bit of damage and not get shot in return. The thing is, you have to be really, really careful. Maybe I'm too passive. That maybe has to do with the fact that I don't play enough of the FCM 50t. But the thing is, I don't want to rush the T34. I don't want to make any aggressive plays here. So I'm really dependent on the T29 and the KV2 on my team, that they don't make mistakes. Unfortunately for me, the T29 and the KV2 are all in very exposed positions where I can't really help them, and I once am basically left alone with an M18 Hellcat and a Panther, and the M18 Hellcat probably just signed out, and now we're going up against the T34 and some other tanks. Keep in mind, the T34 has been buffed very recently, and we are here now on our own. We do have the rate of fire, but we don't have the protection. So I try to take out the tanks that don't have a lot of HP. The T34 very cleverly takes out the M18 and me by just ramming him and shooting me with the gun. And you can see right there, we're in a very tough spot. We have a much better rate of fire than the T34, but his alpha and his rate of fire is going to be enough to take us out of the game, because our alpha is not going to be good enough. Even though we have very good DPM, we're not going to be able to withstand the fire from him and the KV2. So right here, you're in a very awkward position. The FCM 50t, I'm the top tier heavy tank. I'm trying to play this ridgeline because I'm the top tier heavy tank, but to be fair, that was never the intended purpose of this vehicle. You're not supposed to be a frontline vehicle. So I would have been much better at sitting in the back and just hitting them when they come around. But it would have been really awkward and a very weird feeling if the tier 8 heavy tank sits in the back and doesn't engage in the fight. We lost the T29, the KV2, the Hellcat, and the Panther over here that all tried, and the STRV S1. I don't even know why he went up there. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but he would have been much greater help back there. But you can see that you can't really carry anything if it comes to push and shove, or push comes to shove. I think that's the that's the saying. You're very much on your own, and your vehicle is not going to be able to withstand anything. We didn't bounce anything, the armor does not hold up, and it was quite easy for the KV2 and the T34 to take us on. We did kill the IS, and we also killed another tank, I'm not really sure. Oh yeah, the Super Hellcat. but you're so reliant on the team that you can't really be independent in this tank. And this is the experience that you have in the year 2021. The T-34 has been buffed. The FCM 50t has not been buffed. This tank hasn't been looked at in a very long time, and I'm not expecting it to get buffed in the next patch or so. It is a very weird kind of vehicle that has a lot of nice little things that I like, such as, you know, a very nice damage per minute and a nice 90mm gun with not a lot of alpha, but still a nice rate of fire. It zooms in fast, it has great aim time, it's fast, it's a real fast heavy tank. It just doesn't have the armor, and somehow it doesn't fit into the game anymore. I think this is a really sad kind of description of the game itself, because the FCM 50t has been a part of this game for so long, and you can just see what has happened to the game itself, that the FCM 50t is can no longer really be a part of the game, because it was a niche tank back then, and right now it's also still a niche tank, and it just can't really be a part of this ecosystem anymore because it's not strong enough. That's one of the things that I have to say, which kind of, well, I mean, it was obvious that the FCM 50t isn't as popular as it used to be. No one really plays it anymore. I've played a lot of games at tier 8, and I haven't seen an FCM 50t in a very, very long time. And I can understand why. The FCM 50t just doesn't really belong into World of Tanks anymore. And it belongs to an era that is long gone. An era where there were tanks that you can actually hit and pen, and where armor maybe was not as important, or maybe it was still important, but you still had the weak spots where everyone kind of needed a little bit of skill to be able to deal with certain tanks. And nowadays, I mean, the FCM 50t, it just gets slaughtered. You really need a specific kind of map or a specific kind of gameplay style, and you really need to tailor it down to the FCM 50t to make it work. So you have to be a support tank that doesn't get hit at all. You have to hide behind your friends, or you have to go and flank around with medium tanks. And the hit points that you have is basically your armor, because you have no armor, and the hit points you need to utilize, and you need to see who can hit you. You have to calculate who can hit you, how much damage you can take. And basically that all breaks it down to a very unenjoyable gameplay experience in the year 2021. And that's why I would never advise buying the FCM 50t if it comes on sale again. Do not get this tank. Is it worth playing again if you still have it in your garage? I don't think it is worth playing at all. It just is not a lot of fun. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I haven't played French medium heavy tanks in a very long time. Maybe I'm playing it wrong, but I've had quite a few games where I couldn't do anything else than just sit back and see my team get annihilated, and me myself included afterwards, or where I tried to intervene and I got annihilated at first and I didn't really have any impact on the game. This is a very uneventful vehicle that just doesn't fit into the game anymore, and I would highly advise against getting it if you ever have the opportunity. Tell me, what do you think about the FCM 50t? I've been brought back to reality. I had some fun games in it, but still, I would not recommend it. And I'm happy to move on to another tank.